Let's get started. Number 6. Eating their own supplies. When survival gets serious, people become surprisingly creative with things that were never intended to be food. During desperate situations, people have boiled belts, shoes, animal hides, and other leather goods to make them softer and somewhat more digestible. Imagine looking down at your expensive leather shoe after several days without food. Yesterday, fashion. Today, dinner. It sounds ridiculous, but leather is largely made from collagen, a protein. Traditional methods of processing tough hides can involve soaking and prolonged cooking, which can make them easier to chew. Of course, leather products may contain dyes, chemicals, glues, coatings, or other substances that make them unsafe to eat. So this is not exactly a recommendation for tonight's dinner menu. The deeper point is how quickly survival changes the meaning of ordinary objects. A belt stops being something that holds your pants up. A shoe stops being footwear. A candle can become a source of calories in some historical survival stories. When resources disappear, humans start looking at the world differently. We stop seeing objects only for their intended purpose and start asking a much stranger question: what part of this can keep me alive? That mental flexibility is one of the reasons humans have survived so many brutal environments. We are remarkably good at turning junk into tools. Unfortunately, when things get bad enough, we may also start turning tools into lunch. Civilization gives everything a purpose. Desperation gives everything a second opinion. Number 5. Walking until you couldn't. Picture getting lost in the wilderness. No phone signal, no map, no friendly little blue dot telling you that you are, in fact, completely screwed. So you start walking, and walking, and walking. This instinct has saved people, but it has also created enormous problems. When humans panic, we often feel compelled to do something. Sitting still feels wrong, even when staying put might be the smarter choice. That urge can turn survival into an exhausting game of accidental hide and seek. Lost hikers sometimes travel much farther than they realize, burning precious energy and making themselves harder for rescuers to locate. In unfamiliar terrain, people can also become disoriented and unknowingly travel in circles. Your brain is supposed to build a mental map of where you are, but without familiar landmarks, that system can become surprisingly unreliable. Trees all start looking like trees, rocks become suspiciously identical, and suddenly the beautiful mountain landscape has transformed into the world's largest copy-and-paste document. That's why many survival guidelines emphasize staying put when appropriate, especially when rescuers know your last location. Of course, survival situations aren't simple, and sometimes moving is necessary, but panic loves movement because movement feels productive. Your brain basically says, "We have no idea where we are." And your legs respond, "Excellent, let's make that problem geographically larger." Number 4. Drinking anything available. There is a moment during extreme survival when the human brain becomes obsessed with one thing: water. Not coffee, not food, not Wi-Fi, water. The problem is that finding drinkable water in the wilderness can be ridiculously difficult. And throughout history, people stranded at sea, lost in deserts, or trapped in isolated environments have been forced to make horrifying calculations about what they can safely drink. One famous example is urine. Yes, the emergency beverage nobody ordered. But here's the problem. Drinking urine is generally not a useful solution to dehydration. As dehydration gets worse, urine becomes more concentrated with waste products and salts, meaning your kidneys have to work harder to get rid of it. Congratulations. You have invented a beverage that makes your body do extra homework. People have also attempted to drink seawater when stranded at sea. Unfortunately, seawater contains far more salt than your kidneys can efficiently remove. Drinking it can actually make dehydration worse. The real survival lesson is much less glamorous. Water is not automatically safe just because it's wet. Rainwater, streams, plant moisture, and other sources can sometimes help, but contamination and local conditions matter enormously. Survival isn't about grabbing the first liquid you see and shouting, "Hydration!" It's about understanding what your body can actually process. Because when you're desperate enough, even a puddle starts looking like a 5-star restaurant. Number 3. Eating the unthinkable. Imagine you're trapped somewhere remote. Your food is gone, your stomach is making noises that sound less like hunger and more like a formal complaint, and you have exactly 2 options: eat something disgusting, or become something that gets eaten. Throughout history, desperate people have consumed things they would normally run away from, including insects, roots, tree bark, leather, and even parts of animals most people would never consider food. During severe famines, people have boiled leather goods to soften them enough to chew. Horse meat, normally avoided in certain cultures, has become a survival food during wartime shortages. Insects have also saved lives because they're basically tiny packages of protein that happen to look like they were designed by a villain. The reason is brutally simple. Your body has priorities. Social etiquette is somewhere near the bottom of the list when your energy reserves are collapsing. Your brain suddenly stops asking, "Is this culturally acceptable?" and starts asking, "Can this technically become glucose?" Hunger can completely change your relationship with food. Something that looked revolting yesterday can start looking suspiciously like lunch after 3 days without eating. And that's the uncomfortable truth about survival. Civilization gives you preferences. Starvation gives you a menu. Basically, your stomach doesn't care about your standards, it just wants fuel. Number 2. Sleeping in the snow. Imagine being stranded in freezing temperatures with nowhere to sleep. The obvious solution is to find shelter. The less obvious solution is to somehow convince a pile of snow to become your bedroom. But in extreme cold, snow can actually become useful insulation. A properly constructed snow shelter can trap air and block wind, creating an environment dramatically warmer than the exposed surface. That sounds completely backwards because snow is cold. Very cold. The kind of cold that makes your fingers reconsider their career choices. But snow is also full of tiny air pockets, and trapped air is a surprisingly effective insulator. This is why people in Arctic environments have historically built shelters from snow, including igloo-like structures. The trick is that the shelter has to be designed correctly. You need ventilation, protection from collapse, and enough insulation to keep the cold outside from turning your body into a biological popsicle. The human body constantly produces heat. The problem is keeping that heat from escaping. Your clothing, shelter, and surroundings essentially become a negotiation between you and the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is not negotiating. In extreme cold, your body also prioritizes your core temperature, reducing blood flow to your extremities. That's useful for keeping vital organs warm, but terrible news for your fingers and toes. So yes, sometimes surviving the cold means sleeping inside frozen water. Humanity looked at snow and somehow thought, excellent, building material, and somehow, it worked. Number 1. Eating the dead. This is where survival stories become genuinely disturbing. Imagine being trapped somewhere remote, surrounded by people you care about, with no food and no realistic way to escape. Days pass, then more days. Eventually, the human body starts consuming itself. Fat reserves disappear, muscles break down, organs struggle. Your brain becomes increasingly focused on finding energy, because apparently keeping you alive is a full-time job. In a handful of extreme historical survival situations, people have resorted to cannibalism after being trapped without food. One of the most famous examples is the Donner Party, whose members became stranded in the Sierra Nevada during the winter of 1846. Accounts of what happened vary in detail, but some survivors did consume the bodies of people who had died. The Andes flight disaster of 1972 produced another horrifying example. After a plane crash left survivors stranded in freezing mountains without adequate food, some eventually consumed the bodies of those who had died. These stories are disturbing precisely because the people involved weren't cartoon villains. They were ordinary human beings, pushed into extraordinary circumstances. Starvation doesn't politely ask whether you're comfortable with the situation. It starts dismantling your normal priorities one by one. And when every conventional source of food disappears, the boundary between unthinkable and necessary can become terrifyingly thin. It is one of the darkest reminders of survival. Sometimes the human body doesn't care about your moral preferences. It cares about tomorrow morning. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe.